So when I started this build, I knew I wanted a headboard, but I didn't really know what I wanted it to look like or how I was going to attach it. So those are my rough measurements. Basically, it was going to be the same width as the bed, and the height, I really wanted it, this is going under a window, so I didn't want the height to interfere with the window sill. Other than that, I kind of built it as I went. I got an idea for how I wanted to fill in the middle, but I knew I was going to start by making an outer frame and wanted that to be really durable. So I decided to make it with box joints. So all this lumber was planed when I planed the lumber for the top side of the rails, so it was ready to go. It's the thickness I need it to be, which is still about 1.25 inches. And I basically just went through and ripped this down to size. It's all going to be about 5 inches, so it matches the frame. So you can see I'm just taking, this stuff's about 5.5, so I'm only taking about 1/8, a quarter off each side. You can see it's all pretty flat. So all this stuff is cut pretty much the size at this point. And then I'm going to go through and do the box joints. I have a video on my channel showing you how to make this jig and to use it, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly here. It's a very simple process. I made this over a year ago. I use it quite frequently, and it's still pretty dialed in and works quite well. It's a really easy, quick way to make solid joinery. Box joints are going to be nice, solid joinery. You can tell right away if your jig's going to work by laying these on top of each other, and all of my fingers are lining up nicely, which obviously is nice, and my fingers that are going to fit into the first cuts work out nicely as well. And this is just the dry fit. I apologize for the focus. I filmed this on an older iPad, and I've noticed the focus is starting to be a little bit of a pain on this. And then I wanted this tilted back. I didn't want it straight up in the air. I do read a lot at nighttime, so I like to have an angled back. I was taking a slight angle out of this, and because this board is 5 inches, you could see I only took an angle off of the back side. So there is going to be a little bit of a gap in the front because I can only cut 3 inches into it. I also didn't want to remove a ton of material off of the bottom because it has to be structural. So this gap is going to be completely covered by the mattress. If it bothers you, you can make shims to fill it. I do fill it on the ends so you don't see the gap on the ends where there isn't a mattress, but I was fine with it working that way. So after the test piece, I could send my real piece through, and that is how that's going to set. Now obviously at this point I could put my sides in, and they're going to be a little proud on the bottom. I can mark those. I cut those really quickly on the miter saw, and then I could pop that back into place. So my point of mentioning that I kind of designed this as I went is pointing out the fact that some of these cuts would have been easier to do, because I'm going to get to mounting this in a little bit, when parts of the bed were still apart. It's doable with it together, but it could have been a little bit easier without it. So then this is setting in between 2 end tables that I already have, and both of the drawers on the end tables have a basket weave on it. So I decided to mimic that on the headboard so it kind of matches those end tables in the space already. So I just cut this mahogany that I had because I thought it'd be nice to have a contrasting lumber there. And then I cut it into strips. Nothing set in stone here. It was basically the lumber I had, so it was probably about 3/4 by about 1 inch. And then I just moved my blade at an angle to round over the edges. I'm going to steam bend some thin pieces of lumber to wrap and weave it in between these, and it's going to be easier to do that if the edges aren't so square. So then in order to attach these, because I want the headboard to be able to be lifted off, and the whole piece can come apart, but it has to be sturdy. So I wanted to mortise and tenon these vertical elements that are going to align all the basket weaving into the piece. So this would have been smart to do, as you can see, before I cut the angle, because I'm having a little bit of problem keeping it square on my mortising drill, but I would manage to get all those lined up. I set those mortises about 5/16 of an inch back because I'm going to have material on the front and I wanted it to be flush with the face. And then once I had those done, I could go through, and the material is going to be fit into the sides with a groove. So I didn't want it to go through and mess up my finger joints, so I lowered this onto a dado stack. Like I said, going with about 5/16 of an inch. I could slide it to where it was just about to peek out the other end, and then I could chisel this flat. And that is how I did that groove. That groove will not go on the top and the bottom because the top and the bottom are going to be weaved. It just would have been a pain to cut that pattern. So then there are my inside pieces. Like I said, those are basically going to be what I'm bending that wood around. I could fit this all back together, and you can see the grooves are going to be on my two ends. Now I cut this into thin strips, and you can see it slides into place. So if you don't have a steam bending setup, you don't necessarily need it as long as this wood is thin enough, so that will work. I decided to use the steam bending because I had it, and also because this is pine or Douglas fir, but it has some knots in it, and steaming it will help if those knots line up with the bends, because that's usually where lumber decides to splinter on you. So like I said, you saw I bent it when it was dry. It worked fine, but it's just kind of added insurance to use the steaming in this circumstance. And it's so thin. Like I said, these are only a little over 1/4 of an inch. It was about 15 to 20 minutes in the steamer, and then I could line everything up, slide it down, and then you could see how it fits into place. So it's just an under-over simple weaving. I didn't do any sort of perpendicular weaving on this. Didn't want it to get too complicated. Just kind of wanted to mimic that pattern. It was just doing this pretty much to the top. I kind of calculated as I went how much I would need. And I always put my main pieces back in place to hold everything together so that everything stayed on the same plane. So I did about 4 at a time, fit in my steamer reasonably. So I did about 4 at a time, and I only had to do, I think, like 3 rounds of steaming. The last one I had to rip down a little bit before I started, but it all fit in there quite nicely. And then this is basically what that looks like. So then to attach this to the back side of the bed, like I said, I wanted it to be pretty sturdy. It doesn't cantilever, but it is suspended just with one connection point. So the headboard is going to be something that has a tendency to wobble. And every single time I moved in the middle of the night, I didn't want this thing creaking. So basically I decided to make some tapered units that would be permanently glued into the frame and then go through mortise holes in the bed. So basically I had to go through and make a series of holes. The ones in the bottom are all the way through. You could see I used a drill press to start those. If you don't have a mortising machine like I do, you could see I was using a drill press to make those holes. But then for the ones on the bed, because I couldn't take this apart, I just did them by hand. And then instead of using a hand saw to finish it up, the coping saw, I decided to just use the jigsaw to square up these holes, and that worked just as well. So roughly these are like, I think, 1 by 1 1/4. If I ever make plans for this bed, obviously I'll get more accurate dimensions, but once again I was going to use scrap for this, so that kind of was how I based the sizing of this. And then I just made sure that everything lined up, and then I could glue the headboard together. So at this point, like I said, I wanted all those holes in there, and then I could glue it together so that I don't have to worry about trying to drill those holes with the whole thing together. The nice thing about finger joints, you can see, is it really amplifies your gluing surface, which is one of the reasons it's such a strong joint. Kind of self-aligns. I could have it in clamps. Now my angle wasn't great on this, but the way I was able to take the top and the bottom off was I had those ratchet straps on this the whole time. And the ratchet straps held all of my bent pieces in place, so I could take the top off, glue it, reattach it, and do the same to the bottom with the whole thing staying in place. So that was kind of how I did it. And then I cut these finger joints. I always try and do it a little oversized in case there's any sort of undulations in the surface, and then I could go through and belt sand everything flush. So then this is the angle I came up with for the taper. This was a little bit of trial and error, but I'm going to permanently attach these to the headboard, and then as you see, they'll be able to slide through the bottom part of the frame and lock everything into place. So that was basically how I decided to attach it. So this, like I said, this was just a test piece. Once I got the angles right, you could see it's flush against the rails on the bottom. I could go through and cut these. So these are going to go all the way up through the mortises. So they're going to be long enough to go through the bed as well as into the top side mortises. And like I said, I was just using scrap, and then I roughly cut the angle on the miter saw. That's basically what that looks like. And then this is the important part. This all gets glued into place. I think I show it not glued. Once this was all glued, this was extremely sturdy and slid into place. It really doesn't move. You can see it goes through that bottom into that top side mortise, which doesn't go all the way through. And then the whole thing fits into place. Like I said, this is a dry fit. Once these little stakes were glued in place, the headboard really didn't move at all, which was pretty much what I was looking for. And then everything just kind of nicely fits into place. So then that is what that looks like. And all I did to glue those is I slid them out, obviously put some glue in both my holes and then slid them back in, and it worked pretty nicely. And that is what it looks like. You could cover up this back if you want. If you want to put some LED lights in there, it'll shine through the front. It will look pretty cool. I decided to just leave it open. And just for reassurance, I did put a couple carriage bolts through the headboard into the bed. Honestly, I don't think it needed it. It didn't really make a difference in how much it moved, but like I said, I kind of put them there as reassurance. And then like I said, this one gap over here, I just cut a similar angle on a scrap piece of Douglas fir and put that in place, just so when the mattress is in place, that edge doesn't have a gap. So I filled in those two edges. And then that is basically what this looks like finished. The finish for this, I decided to use Osmo oil. It's kind of my finish of choice. It's a really easy finish to apply. It's very forgiving, and a can of it lasts quite a long time. I think it makes the grain pop. I didn't want to stain Douglas fir. Pine doesn't really take stain very well. So one of the reasons I really looked for these pieces with a bunch of different grain is, especially that reddish grain, really looks nice with this hard wax oil finish on it. It's 2 coats, really simple. Something I didn't film is to cover up the plywood ends of my splines, I put some walnut caps in there, and that's what it looks like without the walnut cap. The plywood, you could see the edge grain. I didn't cover it there, obviously, because once the bed is in place, you won't see it. And I just had some walnut I cut down to a 1/2 inch and slid into place so that everything worked out. And then before final assembly, I did put some wax on the legs. This fits together at this point pretty well. Slides apart, fits together really nicely, and the wax will just help with that. And then that's what it looks like in place. I didn't film getting it in place because the camera angles just weren't super great for this one in a smaller space. And when I put my mattress on this, I felt a little too high up. I didn't love it. So luckily, as I said in the previous video, I had not glued those dovetail pieces into place, and that was the only reason I was able to lower this. I just lowered all the rails to the bottom. These dovetail pieces I could pop out because I had this brace on there. I could pop those out, remove these dovetail pieces, and then just lower everything. So I basically sunk that inner frame by about 3 inches. One of those things where I didn't really think of the depth of the mattress while I was building this, and it just didn't look right when I first put it on there. You can see I just lowered that. Could go back eventually and fill this back in, but honestly, it's been working fine. Put another little brace on the bottom because I did not glue these dovetails back in place after that, just in case I decided to change it again. And you could see the difference now with everything lowered. So now the mattress just sinks in there a little bit nicer. The whole idea was kind of to keep this at the same level as those end tables, and the mattress was just a little too high. And now you can see it goes down there pretty deeply, which is nice. It's pretty easy to make the bed with that added lip as well. So I was pretty happy with everything once it was said and done. So thanks for the people that have watched this whole series. This is by far one of my least popular series on YouTube, which is always kind of ironic because this was something I was really excited about. I thought it was a nice solid build that was kind of DIY friendly, and it has pretty much done terrible on there. So the people that have stuck around and watch all these videos and comment every week, I do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this one, and next week will be something else.